I think that the doctors are viewing the MSL as a sort of a colleague. I mean, obviously it's a colleague who works for the drug company, but it's someone they can have that open discussion with. They can discuss things that are not primarily just based on the label of the medication itself, but they can talk about the whole story of the data, and they can also talk about how it relates to other options and have a more frank, honest discussion about where it fits in the broader context. Whereas I think with a rep, they're only allowed to talk what's in the prescribing information, and that's it.
Hello, and welcome to Pharma Sessions, a place for pharmaceutical leaders to come and learn from each other. I'm your host, Jonathan Kaskey. Technology and market trends are bringing change at an ever-accelerating rate, and no person, team, or company can afford to be left behind. Here, we dive into the strategies and tactics that our guests use to tackle these challenges and create new opportunities, and how you can do the same in your own organization. Welcome. On today's episode of Pharma Sessions, I'm thrilled to have Sean Sheffler-Collins. Sean's currently in Global Med Affairs at Astellas and has over 13 years of experience in Med Affairs. And I think what's been really interesting about his particular background is working on both the agency side and now on the pharma side. So on this episode, we're going to explore how Med Affairs is evolving to meet healthcare professionals' needs. We're going to talk about omnichannel communication strategies, creating accessible and engaging scientific data, tech enablement, I'm sure a lot of other good stuff as well. But before we get started, just a reminder that the views here are ours and not reflective of our respective companies. So with that, welcome to the show, Sean.
Thanks so much. Really excited to be with you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. It's a beautiful Monday morning. I always like to start with a little bit of an icebreaker. It helps get to know people. So tell me, what have you had to eat so far today?
All I've had today is an apple and some coffee. So
this is a universal theme, is that Med Affairs people always skimp on the food, but never the caffeine. What do you think that means?
I have 3 kids at home, so I need all the caffeine I can get these days.
Absolutely. It sounds like the reverse of the airplane oxygen mask, where you make sure their needs are met and then you take care of your own. I guess.
For sure.
Excellent. Okay, cool. So let's just jump right in. Tell me a little bit about your background. What drew you into medical affairs and PsyCom in the first place?
Sure. I went to graduate school in neuroscience, and during my graduate work, I realized that I was interested in sort of moving away from the lab bench. And I was trying to think about, what do I enjoy about science? And I realized that it was the communication, the scientific storytelling, and I guess was what I was really interested in. I think I also wanted to be a writer at an early age. And so it's sort of an interesting combination of being able to write and do science at the same time.
I love that. Were you a big reader growing up?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Big reader, and I like doing creative writing classes and did some poetry classes in college and things. I like to think of some of this as storytelling, even though it's very detailed and specific.
Yeah, well, it's so fun. I mean, there's so much talk about the importance of storytelling in all sorts of communications and how much more memorable it is to tell a good story, where, of course, with science, you need the data to back it up, but people remember the message long after they forget the specifics of the statistics in there.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things I also was hopefully able to do is I was always a very concise writer. So I think that's also sort of helped me, that I want to get to the point. And as you said, sort of remember the messages, not everything, not who told it to you, but that sort of planting those key nuggets in your mind.
I feel like there's that famous quote that is attributed to all sorts of different people. I don't know if it's just an internet thing where it's like, I apologize, I would have made the message shorter if I had more time. Right?
Yeah.
But some people say Pascal, some people say Benjamin Franklin. I don't actually know. But I think it's a really interesting concept to think about, particularly in SciComm and even as you're thinking about omni-channel stuff. What's the current viewpoint on how long or how much attention you can get from doctors, and how do you prioritize, I guess, brevity versus the depth of the message?
We only get a couple of minutes of someone's full attention. So that is really key. And I know I've thought, like, when we've made a mechanism of action video or something else, that we all spend all that time reading things, watching videos, but it's really only that first minute or two where you have their attention. And one of the things I've also been thinking about is my brother is sort of a musician. He was saying how with Spotify, things have changed where you no longer have that sort of musical interlude. You get right to the chorus and hope that somebody keeps listening, and then you do the rest of the song. I do think I try and incorporate that as well into what I do, where you really got to start strong because someone's not necessarily going to keep listening. They may move on to something else, or, I think also like at a conference, we are walking through, you see different booths, right? And so, there are all these things going for your attention, and for whatever reason, you stop. And if it's not what you want, you just sort of move on. I think that's the ecosystem that we work in now, where there's a lot of voices, a lot of content, and we want to figure out how to get someone's attention and give them the right information. Now, if we do have their attention in med affairs, I think we have some advantages. On the commercial side, they may have an interaction that's only 3 to 5 minutes. But when a doctor's really willing to talk to an MSL, that visit might be a half hour or longer, where they can really get into the data and talk about all the details about what type of patients, how you manage them. You can have that full story. You really have to come in with that sort of elevator pitch to get them in the room and have them. My goal at the sort of global level is getting them to come ask for more information. I'm not telling them the whole story. I want them to ask.
You're sparking curiosity, right? You're almost earning the right to tell the bigger story by... So let me ask this as a question. Is your approach to do that by leading with your biggest, most compelling point and hope that draws them in? Or are you leading with thought-provoking questions? What is your approach to getting that attention that's going to cause somebody to spend 30 minutes with a member of your team?
It's usually the latter, where you're sort of trying to pique their curiosity, with the exception of if we have some sort of really exciting data, and then I'm gonna blast
be coy about it, right? You can just tell them at that point. Yes,
gonna scream from the rooftops, but most of the time that's not the case, and we're trying to get them excited to think about it again, sort of like a story or something, where you're trying to pique their interest to hear more. And so, as you said, oftentimes it could be like a leading question or something to just hopefully make them stop and think, do I know what I think I know, or could they have more to tell us? Because, I also recognize now I work for a pharma company, so there's only certain types of information an HCP wants to get from the pharma company. Mm-hmm. And we need to stay in that specific area, which is mostly...
Can you say more about what types of information are you referring to?
So sometimes the pharma company is a key source of the data itself. We own the clinical data. So that's something that providers know they can come to us, and we will give them that sort of clear, unbiased data itself. And most of the time, we know they want to interpret it themselves. They don't want us to interpret it for them. Looking at us necessarily, they're looking at us as hard facts. Also, in a sort of development pipeline area, the company also has different molecules, different mechanisms of actions, things they're sort of holding on to a lot more of the information. So that's another area where in the pipeline, we have some more information to give that could be interesting as well. So there's sort of the two sides of the coin, I guess.
I'm thinking about it, what you had said, where an MSL is often getting significant time with the provider, where depending on what data you see, sometimes the commercial interactions are a minute, 2 minutes. I've seen the number 30 seconds. Is that because the commercial is more viewed as transactional, like, hey, I just need to engage with this person to get my sample? Or is it's a major difference where depending on what data you see, sometimes the commercial interactions are a minute, 2 minutes. I've seen the number 30 seconds, right? Is that because the commercial is more viewed as transactional, like, hey, I just need to engage with this person to get my samples? Or is it, it's a major difference in what you're talking about. What do you attribute that to?
I think that in the best case scenario, I think that the doctors are viewing the MSL as a sort of a colleague. I mean, obviously it's a colleague who works for the drug company, but it's someone they can have that open discussion with. Mm-hmm. They can discuss things that are not primarily just based on the label of the medication itself, but they can talk about the whole story of the data, and they can also talk about how it relates to other options and have a more frank, honest discussion about where it fits in the broader context. Whereas I think with a rep, they're only allowed to talk what's in the prescribing information, and that's it. So I think there has been a little bit of a shift of balance where if you're coming to the company to ask a question, most people would rather talk to the scientist than someone who has a different knowledge set. I think that's, the interactions don't happen all the time, but when they do, I think it can be a really positive discussion. And I think that's also where we as a company get a lot of great insights from those interactions to see what are the questions people are asking, what are they thinking about, and we can make decisions of, okay, there's a lot of interest in this type of side effect or changing the dosing or these types of patients. Do we have data? Could we consider a new study? How do we sort of get that detail? So it is a really nice sort of dialogue. It's not just one-sided. I think we really value those as well. Give us a lot of good information as well. Again, to sort of, because I definitely view the med affairs perspective a lot is that we're trying to help clinicians decide who's going to succeed on the treatment. We want them to figure out who of my patients could benefit from this. Mm-hmm. And also, if I give them the medication, what do I need to be careful of? What are the side effects? What might they experience that I can warn them in advance? Or I can decide when to have follow-up visits, or decide when I'm going to start at this dose and when I'm going to titrate, or when I may need to come back down. And we're really trying to give them that information so they can make the best decision. Because in any trial, every patient doesn't benefit from the medicine. So we want to try and figure out as much as we can who will benefit and give them that information so they can make the decision.
And it sounds like you covered a lot there, but one of the things that kind of stuck out to me was this idea of looking at the questions themselves that the doctors are asking in order to understand where those gaps in education may be, kind of trying to glean insights from the stuff coming from the other side, even if they're not specifically saying, hey, you need to show me more data on safety and efficacy. It's if you have a lot of questions about that, you understand how to prioritize that. Like if you're thinking about managing a fairly large MSL team, how do you make sure that those are captured, or I'm guessing input in somewhat of a standard manner so that you can then start to do that type of analysis?
So we get them from different sources. I mean, the MSLs can put the feedback directly into the CRM system to bring the insights in. But that's a challenge for us, and I'm not sure if it's true. I assume it's probably also true for other companies. We're truly a global company, but the company isn't exactly the same around the globe. And, different MSLs sometimes are using different software, and it's coming in, and we have to figure out the best solution to get those insights and understand them. I know that is an area where a lot of companies are using some AI to help summarize the information and help them, if we have some huge spreadsheet that has all the insights that we brought in, what do you do with that? It's a lot of data. And I think AI, this is another example where I think AI is a really powerful tool, but you still also need to filter it through someone's experience because it's only as good as you train it. And that doesn't.
Yeah. Well, even the idea of using AI or other tech just to clean up and standardize the data coming in. And then there can be analysis however you do that, whether it's done by machine or whether it's done by people. But if you're able to say, okay, yeah, in the US, we're using this, and this system, and people tend to say this. In Brazil, it might be something totally different. If we can create a standardized input, that makes whatever you end up doing with that much easier and more effective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is always true that, different places have different concerns and considerations. And we also I'm in the global team, but then we've also decided here's some of our priority areas. So, we can't make personalized content for everyone. So we have to say, okay, these are the key countries that we want to work with and make sure when we create content, it's going to meet their needs. And then we also, that's sort of the first pass. And then the second pass would be other places who have other concerns. What can we do to adapt what we have and figure out how to meet their needs as well?
If you've been enjoying the conversations here on Pharma Sessions, you should know they're made possible by the team at Xhunt. Xhunt helps life sciences companies turn complex data into clear, actionable insight. For years, Xhunt has made complicated data sets simple to help commercial, medical, and operations teams map what's happening, predict what's next, and make stronger decisions faster. And now there's an added AI layer that makes everything work so much better. I was actually pretty jaded about some of the AI approaches I'd seen, but when Xhunt showed me theirs, I actually left my job to come work for them. It's really awesome. So if you want to understand your market, your customers, or your performance with more clarity than ever, check out xhunt.com. That's xsunt.com. All right, let's jump back into the episode.
So that's an interesting thing, and that is kind of a transition point to one thing I wanted to talk about during this conversation is you've had a fairly unique set of experiences working both on the agency side and the pharma side. And I feel like just from conversations I've had with different people, sometimes people are on one side of that fence and the other side of the fence, and they're always looking over and saying, oh, I wonder if the grass is greener on the other side. So I'm going to ask you about that in general, but I think one of the nice things about being on the vendor side is if, let's say, you're doing something, I mean, even as you were talking about storytelling earlier, it gives you a chance to get a whole bunch more reps at a given task, for lack of a better term, because you're not just doing it for one drug, but you might be doing the same thing for 10 or 20 different drugs. What is your take on personal history and how that's either helped or slowed you down on the pharma side?
I found it enormously useful to have had that experience. As you said, I think, first of all, understanding, I think I worked at maybe 5 or so different agencies. So understanding how each agency does things differently, and then working with a lot of different pharma companies, working on a lot of different drugs in a lot of different therapy areas, which bringing that experience, I think, is really critical. And, now on the pharma side, I really value the agency's perspective to understand, how do we sort of get outside of our box? What are other companies doing, or what are other experiences you can bring to that? Because, I think that's really valuable. And, there are some preferences of different type of HCPs have different ways they like to hear information. And some may be very tech savvy, and some may be very unwilling, very focused on maybe just reading a journal article and, figuring out sort of what the preferences are. But I think that experience has been great. And I've certainly, leaned extremely heavily on my prior experience in order to figure out what's happening. And, I think also, I was saying, going to a Congress is also a great time to walk around and see again, what are other companies doing, and get a sense of what the sort of best practices are. I think that's really helpful. Now, to your earlier question, I think I didn't understand on the agency side what my job would be like working for the company itself. I think that was a big difference. And
Yeah, how so?
well, so one difference is that I've really only been focused on one product at a time. So everyone is very in-depth knowledge and very focused on one thing and, not seeing everything else. I think the other thing is that just sort of the decision-making process and how different choices are being made at that sort of global level and its implications. And I find myself probably on a daily basis really having to justify what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, and why. And I think I spend a lot more time talking to different stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were talking earlier about different insights, taking the insights and saying the reason that I'm doing this publication or creating this video or creating these slides, we're doing that because of this information we received and because of this, what's happening in the competitive landscape, or I saw this thing at the ASCO meeting that was really cool. We should do something like that. And,
right. It makes sense because if you think about it, at an agency, you're essentially working on a project and you don't need to justify why you're working on the project because the client hired you to do that. Versus here, right, you're making decisions, strategic and tactical. And so, of course, you have to communicate with the various stakeholders across the organization and up management and everything about why you're making those decisions. But and
I think also following through as well, like as you were saying, so at the agency, you sort of complete the task and that's sort of the end. But now, I complete it, but then I want to ask, okay, to the MSLs that are using it, is this working? What could I do better? Is there something did we miss something? What feedback did you get? And sort of continuing to evolve. It's more of an iterative, collaborative process.
Right.
In that way.
Because you have to live with the results so you're not on to the next client. But I think it's also kind of cool, as you talked about, sort of leveraging your agency partners. I mean, I always had this concept in mind of like, okay, if you're just head down and you're doing things the way that Astellas has always done it, you're probably trying to get better every time and you're optimizing on that particular framework. But an agency partner might understand, all right, well, working with 20 or 30 different companies, is this even the best framework to be refining, right? So I think that there's a lot of benefit there to a strong partnership just because it's a different set of expertise. I mean, that was always my experience when for a time, I was helping a lot of med affairs companies do virtual ad boards asynchronously. And I was like, I will never have any level of understanding about the science in any way that will be helpful here. But I do know actually how to engage with doctors really, really well because I've seen like 2,500 of these things over the last few years. So it's like you just have your particular skill sets, and I feel like part of your job, right, is in bringing in those right people who are experts in their particular patch of everything that you're trying to do.
And I think I really value the agencies, to help us innovate is one real area where I think they have so much better a finger on the pulse. And, we sit and we have processes and sometimes we have discussions with legal and others and say, oh, I don't know if we could do that. And then, the agency is super humble, say, well, look, here are all the other companies that are doing just that we work on. Like we had one example creating a microsite for a conference where we could share our data. And, that was something that company was very resistant to. And then colleagues were able to convince them, this is a great idea, we should do it. And then immediately they decided, oh, we need to do this at every single, this is the thing we need to do.
Complete 180. Right. So can you tell me more about that? Because that's something people are always interested. Like it's hard sometimes to bring innovation to a pharma company because legitimately it's such a regulated space, right? They have to be super careful. So how were you able to create the business case to get if you want to talk about that one in particular, more at a high level, like to get something new approved.
It's having a lot of discussions with the different stakeholders. And as I was saying earlier, sort of building the case. So saying, I think one thing that's really persuasive with the legal ethics compliance is when other similar companies are doing something. Right. So because they are also facing the same regulation and risk. And so especially if some of the very large companies are doing it, that's a good case where they can consider it. So building that case, building that argument of here are things that are doing, and then also we're under a lot of pressure to show metrics and value of what we're doing. So, for the instance of the microsite, it's a great way to say, okay, if we just have a poster at a conference, here's an idea of how many people will see it. But we can get the data from the site of how many unique users we have almost instantly. And we can also take people to the site a few days later who weren't able to attend the meeting. We can also, the MSL can talk to them and they say, oh, you guys had data, I wasn't able to go for this reason, or I live in Brazil, the conference was in America, and here's the link, go check out what we did. And so it's a great way to collect that information and see who's looking at it and expanding the reach, right? I mean, that's another key thing for Med Affairs is we want to reach as many people as we can. Yes. That's always our goal, because we don't have a sales objective. We don't have those benchmarks. So we're really trying to reach as many people. And again, hoping that leads them to engage with us in whichever way channel they like, whether it's a website, whether it's reading a paper, meeting with MSL, they're all positive.
This kind of gets into the idea of omnichannel a bit, which is you're hoping to meet people kind of where they live. And in some ways, it's kind of democratizing things. If, as you said, somebody who can't travel to Chicago for ASCO can see things because you're providing that information in a venue that they already attend. So when you're thinking about, there's so many options for a broad term like omni-channel, are you typically looking at reach data, at some type of analytics around how long people are staying on your message or retaining your message? What types of data are you looking at to sort of understand the best way to manage all this?
I'll give you the caveat that it's an evolving process, but I think number one is the reach. How many people can we get, and how much, where we're allowed to collect information, where are they coming from? So in the US, we can get that data. For European countries, it's not possible. So understanding who's looking at it from where, how long can they spend? Because I think there is, as we were talking about before with the MSL, there is, if they're only spending a few seconds, they're not necessarily getting the message. But if they're staying for a long time, then we feel confident that what they retain is their own story, but they heard the message. And then I think the other key metric is the follow-up, right? If they continue to engage with the company in any way, that's our other key thing. So, we view it as sort of one team with the MSLs, with the field reps. We all have the same clinicians, and we try as hard as we can to be seamless in that, so that we're not all bothering same people. That's some missteps that have happened in the past where, both the MSL and the sales rep are talking to the same doctor. They say, stop sending me emails. I've had enough. So, we want to make sure they're engaging with whoever they're comfortable with, whether that's a medical information inquiry, whether it's, just looking through our website, whether they want to meet with the MSL, whether they want to talk to a rep, whoever. I guess our key thing with the omnichannel is just that they're continuing to engage with us, because if they don't, then I think that's sort of a missed opportunity.
Some of that stuff happens for kind of best intentions, right? Where it's like, well, medical and commercial have to be completely firewalled from each other. And then you do end up in a scenario where, because you're trying to quote unquote do the right thing, like people are getting inundated because they can't see it. So there's definitely a balance that is respectful of the regulatory environment of what medical's role is, and not having commercial goals tied to them, but also doesn't create a bad experience for providers. I feel like
we have like one of the things that we've done that I think has been nice at Astellas is we have sort of omnichannel partners that collaborate with both the medical and the commercial teams. And so they're a good point of contact to sort of keep us in communication in the compliant way, so that we're discussing and we know what each other's doing without breaching any firewalls. But at least there's someone who can see the different paths and make sure that we're working together instead of in silos.
Yes, that makes a ton of sense. All right, Sean, so we've covered a lot here, and I just want to end with a quick callback, because you had talked earlier at the very beginning about writing and about being a reader. What have you read lately that's interesting or that you think is worth sharing? Anything stick with you? That's an on-the-spot question, I know.
That is a hard question. I might need to pull up my list for once.
Yeah. And you know what's funny? I read on the Kindle, and I find myself always forgetting the title of the book that I'm reading because you're not staring at it all the time. But while you're going, I'll share mine. I just finished a new book by this author who I really like called Gary Steingart. Wrote Super Sad True Love Story. Was, I think, like one of his breakout ones, but this one was called Vera or Truth, and it was a really interesting, I guess you could call it dystopian future, although it's leaning more towards dystopian present in the way that he's writing it. But I highly recommend it if you're looking for something that's interesting and kind of funny and very good.
I'm reading The Antidote by Karen Russell, which is
okay.
Been enjoying that. It has a little bit of magical realism, which is something that's really, really fun. I've also been, which is not a new one, but the book Less I've been recommending to a lot of people, which is I really like, because it's, especially in these times that are pretty contentious, it's like a love story, and I really, it's something sort of light and very well written. Really like that one. And let me see, the other one. I love Colson Whitehead, so I guess anything by Colson Whitehead. I love that sort of like sci-fi, dystopian, again, magical realism. Those are themes that I love. So
awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks. We'll leave it there. But Sean, it was great talking with you today. Yes, I really appreciate it. And that's a wrap on today's episode of Pharma Sessions with me, Jonathan Kaskey. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to hit follow or subscribe and share it with someone else in the pharma world who might need to hear it. For more on pharma trends, career growth, and business strategies, connect with me, Jonathan Kaskey, on LinkedIn. Until next time, thanks for listening.